The fluorescent lights above buzzed like angry wasps as I stood frozen in the break room, my hands trembling around the patient chart I just discovered. Room 314's billing showed 3 procedures that never happened, and I knew because I was there the entire time. Mrs. Rodriguez had only received basic wound care, not the expensive surgical intervention listed on her insurance claim. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at: systematic fraud that could destroy families financially and put lives at risk. I'd been working as a registered nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago for 3 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. The winter wind rattled the windows of the 23rd floor as I studied the falsified records more carefully. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately altered patient documentation to inflate billing charges, and the signature at the bottom belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, the head of our surgical department. My pulse quickened as footsteps approached the break room. I quickly closed the chart and tried to look casual, but Dr. Webb himself walked in, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying temples and the kind of confidence that came from years of being untouchable. His eyes immediately went to the chart in my hands. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, his voice sharp and suspicious. "I was just reviewing post-op care instructions for Mrs. Rodriguez," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting strange shadows across his face. He snatched the chart from my hands with more force than necessary. "Mrs. Rodriguez is no longer your concern. I'm reassigning her care to Jennifer." His eyes narrowed as he studied me. "You seem to have a lot of questions about things that don't involve you directly." The way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't about patient care anymore. He knew that I knew. The break room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of an ambulance siren cutting through the Chicago traffic, and I wondered if I was about to become the next emergency case. "Dr. Webb, I noticed some discrepancies in the billing documentation," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think there might be some errors that need to be corrected." His expression changed completely. The professional mask slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Errors?" He stepped closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the antiseptic hospital air. "Let me be very clear about something. You're a nurse. Your job is to follow orders, not to analyze billing procedures or question medical decisions made by your superiors." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribcage as he continued speaking, his voice getting quieter and more menacing with each word. "I've been practicing medicine for over 20 years. I've saved more lives than you can count, and I've built relationships with patients and their families that go back generations. Do you really think anyone is going to believe a junior nurse over me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're irrelevant, a replaceable cog in a very large machine." That word hit me like a physical blow. Irrelevant, as if everything I'd worked for, every life I'd helped save, every family I'd comforted during their darkest moments meant absolutely nothing. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. "But the documentation clearly shows," I started to protest. "The documentation shows exactly what it needs to show," he interrupted. "And if you know what's good for your career, you'll forget whatever you think you saw. This hospital runs on trust and hierarchy. Break that trust, and you'll find yourself working at some clinic in the suburbs, assuming anyone will even hire you after I'm done with your reference letters." The threat was clear. He wasn't just talking about firing me, he was talking about destroying my entire career. In the medical field, reputation was everything, and one bad reference from a department head could blacklist me permanently. The walls of the break room felt like they were closing in as the reality of my situation hit me. Outside, snow was beginning to fall against the windows, and I could see the lights of downtown Chicago twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, families were trusting this hospital with their lives and their life savings, and they had no idea they were being systematically robbed by the very people sworn to heal them. "Do we understand each other?" Dr. Webb asked, his voice carrying the weight of an ultimatum. I nodded silently, not trusting my voice to remain steady. He smiled then, a predatory expression that made my blood run cold. "Good. Now get back to work. And remember, some things are better left alone." As he walked out, Leaving me alone in the break room with the buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of fear in the air, I realized that my life had just changed forever. I could either stay silent and become complicit in whatever was happening here, or I could fight back and risk losing everything I'd worked for. But as I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and all the other patients who were being victimized, I knew there was really only one choice I could live with. The question was, how do you take down someone who holds all the power when you're just an irrelevant nurse? The answer would come to me soon enough, but first, I needed to be much smarter about how I gathered evidence. Because if Dr. Webb thought I was irrelevant, he was about to learn just how dangerous an irrelevant person could be. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, with Lake Michigan winds cutting through downtown Chicago like frozen knives. I sat in my Honda Civic in the hospital parking garage, staring at the employee entrance and trying to summon the courage to walk inside. My hands were still shaking from the previous night. I'd barely slept, replaying Dr. Webb's threats over and over in my mind. But I'd also made a decision that terrified and empowered me at the same time. I was going to document everything. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister Maria in Phoenix. "How's work going? Still love being a lifesaver." The irony was crushing. How could I explain that the place where I was supposed to save lives had become a place where lives were being systematically destroyed for profit? I shoved the phone back in my scrubs pocket and headed inside. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt like ascending to my execution. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar chaos of morning shift change, nurses rushing between rooms, monitors beeping, the constant hum of medical equipment keeping people alive. But now everything looked different. Every chart, every procedure, every interaction with Dr. Webb's department felt potentially contaminated. "Hey, you okay?" Jennifer Martinez, my closest friend on the floor, touched my arm as I walked past the nurse's station. She was a petite woman with kind eyes who'd started the same day I did 3 years ago. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything, but Dr. Webb's words echoed in my mind. This hospital runs on trust and hierarchy. How could I be sure Jennifer wouldn't report back to him? In this environment, everyone's job security depended on staying in the good graces of the department heads. "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. "Long night," but Jennifer knew me too well. "Girl, we've been through hell together. What's really going on?" Before I could answer, Dr. Webb's voice cut through the morning chatter like a scalpel. "Staff meeting. Conference room B. Now." My stomach dropped as I followed the group of nurses and residents into the sterile conference room. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter here, more unforgiving. Dr. Webb stood at the head of the table in his pristine white coat, looking like the picture of medical authority. But I could see something different in his eyes now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "I want to address some concerns that have come to my attention," he began, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me for just a fraction of a second too long. "It's come to my notice that some staff members have been questioning certain administrative procedures." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of morning traffic on Michigan Avenue below. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribcage as he continued. "Let me be absolutely clear. Patient billing and insurance documentation is handled by qualified administrative personnel and attending physicians. Nursing staff should focus on patient care, not on matters outside their expertise or authority." He paused, letting his words sink in. Several nurses shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still. Furthermore, any concerns about hospital procedures should go through proper channels, your direct supervisor, then department administration. Spreading rumors or discussing confidential patient information with unauthorized personnel is not only unprofessional, it's a violation of HIPAA regulations that can result in immediate termination and legal action. The threat was clear to everyone in the room, but it was specifically directed at me. I could feel Jennifer's eyes on me, and I knew she'd figured out that this meeting was because of something I'd done. The weight of that realization was almost crushing. "Are there any questions?" Dr. Webb asked, his voice carrying the clear implication that there better not be. Silence stretched across the room like a taut wire. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, and I wondered if it was coming for me. When no one spoke, Dr. Webb nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. Now let's get back to saving lives." As the meeting dispersed, I hung back, pretending to organize my notes. Jennifer waited for me by the door, What did you do? She whispered urgently. I looked around to make sure we were alone, then pulled her into an empty supply closet. The smell of disinfectant was overwhelming in the cramped space, but it was the only place I could be sure we wouldn't be overheard. I found something, Jen. Something big. My voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Webb is falsifying patient records and billing for procedures that never happened. Her face went white. Are you absolutely sure? I nodded, pulling out my phone to show her the photos I'd secretly taken of the doctor charts during my shift the previous evening. Look at Mrs. Rodriguez's file. She was billed for a complex surgical procedure, but all she got was basic wound care. I was there, Jen. I saw everything. Jennifer stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Oh my God! How many patients? I don't know yet, but I think it's been going on for months, maybe longer. I paused, watching her process the information. The question is, what do we do about it? We. Her voice cracked. You mean, what do you do about it? I have 3 kids and a mortgage. I can't afford to lose this job. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I understood her position completely. In Chicago's competitive medical market, jobs like ours were precious, and Dr. Webb's influence extended far beyond this hospital. One word from him could end any of our careers permanently. So you're just going to pretend you never saw this? I asked. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm sorry. I really am. But I can't risk everything for something that might not even stick. You know how these things go. Whistleblowers get crucified, and the powerful people find ways to survive. She left me alone in the supply closet, surrounded by boxes of gauze and antiseptic wipes, feeling more isolated than I'd ever felt in my life. But her rejection also crystallized something inside me. If I was going to do this, I was going to have to do it completely alone. For the rest of my shift, I moved through the hospital like a ghost, documenting everything I could while maintaining the appearance of normal nursing duties. Every falsified chart, every inflated bill, every patient who was being robbed, I photographed it all with my phone, careful to avoid security cameras and prying eyes. By the time my shift ended at 7 p.m., I had evidence of at least 12 cases of billing fraud, totaling over $200,000 in fraudulent charges. But I also had something else, the growing realization that Dr. Webb was watching me. Everywhere I went, he seemed to appear, his cold eyes tracking my movements like a predator stalking prey. As I walked through the parking garage toward my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mind your own business, or there will be consequences. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. The parking garage suddenly felt enormous and threatening, full of shadows where anyone could be hiding. But as fear tried to paralyze me, something else took over, a burning anger at being threatened for trying to do the right thing. Dr. Webb thought he could intimidate me into silence. He was about to learn that some people, even irrelevant ones, don't intimidate easily. 2 weeks had passed since the threatening text message, and I'd become a master of surveillance in my own workplace. I arrived early, stayed late, and moved through Northwestern Memorial like a detective disguised as a nurse. The evidence I'd gathered was staggering, over 30 cases of fraudulent billing totaling nearly $500,000. But what I discovered next would change everything, and it started with an elderly man named Robertson who was about to die because of Dr. Webb's greed. It was a Tuesday morning when Mr. Chun was admitted with chest pain. His insurance records showed he was scheduled for an emergency cardiac catheterization, a procedure that would cost over $50,000 and required immediate intervention. I was assigned to prep him for surgery, but when I checked his actual condition, my blood ran cold. His EKG was normal. His cardiac enzymes were normal. He was having a panic attack, not a heart attack, but someone had altered his charts to justify the expensive procedure. I found Dr. Webb in the hallway outside Mr. Chen's room, confidently explaining to the family why emergency surgery was necessary. The man's daughter, a woman in her 40s with worried eyes, hung on every word. The blockage is severe, Dr. Webb was saying, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that made people trust him completely. Without immediate intervention, your father could have a massive heart attack within hours. I watched from behind the nurse's station as the daughter signed consent forms with trembling hands, authorizing a procedure her father didn't need. The insurance paperwork alone would bankrupt their family if complications arose, which they often did in unnecessary surgeries. But Dr. Webb was already mentally counting his commission. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was attempted murder disguised as medical care. I waited until Dr. Webb left for his lunch break, then made my move. The hospital's East Wing had an old conference room that was rarely used, filled with outdated medical equipment and stacks of old files. More importantly, it had a landline phone that wasn't connected to the hospital's recording system. I discovered this room 3 days earlier while following Dr. Webb's pattern of movements. I dialed his cell phone number from memory, my heart pounding as it rang. He answered on the second ring. Dr. Webb speaking. I disguised my voice slightly, making it sound more official. Doctor, this is Linda from Billing Administration. We have some questions about the Chun cardiac procedure scheduled for this afternoon. There was a pause. What kind of questions? Well, sir, the insurance pre-authorization department is questioning the necessity based on the initial EKG results. They're asking for additional justification for the catheterization. His voice changed, becoming more defensive. The EKG results were clearly abnormal. I don't know what they're looking at. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my moment. Sir, I'm looking at the EKG right now, and it shows normal sinus rhythm. Are you sure you're thinking of the right patient? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Outside the conference room window, I could see Lake Michigan stretching toward the horizon, gray and infinite under the cloudy sky. When Dr. Webb finally spoke, his voice was cold and calculating. Listen carefully. The EKG results you're looking at are preliminary. I've ordered additional testing that shows significant abnormalities requiring immediate intervention. Update your records accordingly, and don't question my medical judgment again. But doctor, I pressed, hoping to get him to say more. The patient's cardiac enzymes are also normal, and his symptoms are consistent with anxiety rather than cardiac distress. His voice dropped to a whisper, but I could hear every word clearly. I don't care what the tests say. This patient has excellent insurance coverage, and his family can afford the out-of-pocket expenses. The procedure goes forward as scheduled, and if anyone asks questions, you tell them that Dr. Marcus Webb determined it was medically necessary. End of discussion. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. He just admitted to scheduling an unnecessary surgery purely for financial gain, and I had it all on tape. My phone had been recording the entire conversation through a recording app I downloaded specifically for this purpose. I understand, doctor, I said quietly. The procedure will go forward. After I hung up, I sat in the empty conference room for several minutes, staring at my phone and the damning recording it contained. This was it, the smoking gun that would bring down Dr. Webb's entire operation. But it was also a death sentence for my career if I was wrong about anything. I thought about Mr. Chun, lying in his hospital bed while his daughter worried herself sick about his condition. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and the dozens of other patients who'd been victimized by this system of corruption. And I thought about Dr. Webb's words from our first confrontation. You're irrelevant. Maybe I was irrelevant to him, but I wasn't irrelevant to the people whose lives were being destroyed by his greed. I spent the rest of my shift carefully documenting Mr. Chen's actual condition and the discrepancies in his records. By 3 p.m., I had a complete file proving that the surgery was unnecessary and that Dr. Webb had knowingly falsified the justification. But I also knew that I couldn't let an innocent man go under the knife just to protect my evidence. I made a decision that would change everything. I walked directly to Mr. Chen's room, where his daughter was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand and trying not to cry. The old man looked tired but alert, nothing like someone who needed emergency cardiac surgery. "Excuse me," I said softly, closing the door behind me. "I'm one of your father's nurses, and I need to speak with you about his procedure." The daughter looked up with hope in her eyes. "Is there good news? Will the surgery be less complicated than they thought?" I sat down in the chair beside her, knowing that what I was about to do would probably end my career but might save her father's life. "Ma'am, I need you to get a second opinion before allowing the surgery to proceed." Her face clouded with confusion. "But Dr. Webb said it was an emergency. He said my father could die if we wait." "Your father's test results don't support that diagnosis," I said carefully, trying to find words that wouldn't get me arrested for interfering with medical care. "I strongly recommend that you ask to see another cardiologist before proceeding." The woman stared at me for a long moment, then looked at her father, who had been listening to our conversation with growing interest. "Are you saying the surgery isn't necessary?" he asked in a weak but clear voice. Before I could answer, the door burst open and Dr. Webb walked in, his face flushed with anger. He'd obviously seen me enter the room and had come to investigate. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes darting between me and the Chen family. I stood up slowly, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I was just checking on Mr. Chen's preoperative status, doctor." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "I see. Well, everything is proceeding as planned. The patient will be taken to surgery within the hour." He turned to me with a look that could have melted steel. "You're needed elsewhere." Immediately, as I walked toward the door, Mr. Chen's daughter called out, "Nurse, wait. What did you mean about getting a second opinion?" Dr. Webb's face went white, then red with fury. In that moment, I realized that he knew I knew everything, and the game between us had just escalated to a level where only one of us would survive professionally. "I meant that your father is in excellent hands with Dr. Webb," I said, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. "I'm sure everything will work out perfectly." But as I walked out of the room, I heard Mr. Chen's daughter say the words that would seal Dr. Webb's fate. "Dad, I think we should call Dr. Peterson for a second opinion before we do anything." The look Dr. Webb gave me as I left the room was pure poison. He knew that I'd just planted a seed that would grow into his destruction, and he also knew that he was about to declare war on someone he'd underestimated completely. The battle was just beginning, but I had the recording that would end it. The only question was whether I'd survive long enough to use it. The termination letter arrived at my apartment on a Friday evening, delivered by certified mail while Chicago's autumn wind rattled my windows on the north side. The envelope bore Northwestern Memorial's official letterhead, and I knew what it contained before I even opened it. Dr. Webb had moved faster than I'd anticipated, but not fast enough to stop what I'd already set in motion. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated due to violation of patient confidentiality protocols and insubordination toward medical staff," the letter read. It was signed by Dr. Webb himself and countersigned by the hospital administrator. They'd made it look official, professional, even justified. But I knew the real reason. I'd cost them Mr. Chen's $50,000 surgery when his family got that second opinion and discovered he needed anxiety medication, not cardiac catheterization. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Photographs of falsified records, copies of billing discrepancies, and most importantly, the recording of Dr. Webb admitting to scheduling unnecessary procedures for financial gain. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd fired me for the one ethical thing I'd done, while I had proof of countless unethical things they'd been doing for months. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this the nurse who worked with Dr. Webb?" The voice belonged to an older woman, shaky but determined. "Who is this?" I asked cautiously. "My name is Dorothy Martinez. My husband Carlos was a patient at Northwestern Memorial 3 months ago. He died after a surgery that, well, we're not sure he needed. Someone gave me your number and said you might be able to help us understand what happened." My heart started racing. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I can." "Please," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "The insurance company is saying the surgery was experimental and they won't cover it. We lost our house. We lost everything. And I keep thinking that if someone had just asked more questions." I closed my eyes, seeing the faces of all the patients I'd documented over the past weeks. Mr. Chen had been lucky. His family had listened to my subtle warning and sought a second opinion. But how many others hadn't been so fortunate? "Mrs. Martinez, I think you should contact a lawyer," I said carefully. "Someone who specializes in medical malpractice. We tried that. 3 different lawyers. They all said it would be too hard to prove anything against a respected doctor like Webb. They said we'd need inside information, someone who witnessed what really happened." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had exactly what she needed, not just for her case, but for dozens of other families who'd been victimized by Dr. Webb's greed. But using it would mean going to war with one of Chicago's most powerful medical institutions. That night, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I called Thomas Mitchell, a lawyer whose commercials I'd seen on late-night television. He specialized in taking on cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch, and he had a reputation for going after powerful defendants. We met the next morning at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, away from downtown where hospital staff might see us. Mitchell was a thin man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that seemed out of place among the college students and artists who frequented the cafe. "Show me what you have," he said without preamble. I laid out everything: the photographs, the billing records, the documentation of unnecessary procedures, and finally, the recording of Dr. Webb's admission. Mitchell listened to the audio 3 times, his expression growing more intense with each replay. "This is explosive," he said finally, "but you understand what you're getting into. They're going to come after you with everything they have. They'll try to destroy your credibility, your career, maybe even your personal life." I thought about Mrs. Martinez, about Mr. Chun, about all the families who'd been victimized while I stayed silent. What choice do I have? Mitchell smiled for the first time since we'd met. "That's what I wanted to hear. Let's take these bastards down." The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later, naming Dr. Webb, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and the hospital's parent corporation as defendants. The allegations included medical fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and wrongful death. Within hours of the filing, the story was picked up by every major news outlet in Chicago. But Dr. Webb's counterattack was swift and vicious. Within days, stories began appearing in medical journals, questioning my competence as a nurse. Anonymous sources claimed I had a history of making false accusations against doctors. Someone leaked details of my student loan debt and suggested I was motivated by money rather than justice. The termination letter arrived at my apartment on a Friday evening, delivered by certified mail while Chicago's autumn wind rattled my windows on the north side. The envelope bore Northwestern Memorial's official letterhead, and I knew what it contained before I even opened it. Dr. Webb had moved faster than I'd anticipated, but not fast enough to stop what I'd already set in motion. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated due to violation of patient confidentiality protocols and insubordination toward medical staff," the letter read. It was signed by Dr. Webb himself and countersigned by the hospital administrator. They'd made it look official, professional, even justified. But I knew the real reason. I'd cost them Mr. Chen's $50,000 surgery when his family got that second opinion and discovered he needed anxiety medication, not cardiac catheterization. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Photographs of falsified records, copies of billing discrepancies, and most importantly, the recording of Dr. Webb admitting to scheduling unnecessary procedures for financial gain. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd fired me for the one ethical thing I'd done, while I had proof of countless unethical things they'd been doing for months. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this the nurse who worked with Dr. Webb?" The voice belonged to an older woman, shaky but determined. "Who is this?" I asked cautiously. "My name is Dorothy Martinez. My husband Carlos was a patient at Northwestern Memorial 3 months ago. He died after a surgery that, well, we're not sure he needed. Someone gave me your number and said you might be able to help us understand what happened." My heart started racing. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I can." "Please," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "The insurance company is saying the surgery was experimental and they won't cover it. We lost our house. We lost everything. And I keep thinking that if someone had just asked more questions." I closed my eyes, seeing the faces of all the patients I documented over the past weeks. Mr. Chin had been lucky. His family had listened to my subtle warning and sought a second opinion. But how many others hadn't been so fortunate? "Mrs. Martinez, I think you should contact a lawyer," I said carefully. "Someone who specializes in medical malpractice. We tried that. 3 different lawyers. They all said it would be too hard to prove anything against a respected doctor like Webb. They said we'd need inside information, someone who witnessed what really happened." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had exactly what she needed, not just for her case, but for dozens of other families who'd been victimized by Dr. Webb's greed. But using it would mean going to war with one of Chicago's most powerful medical institutions. That night, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I called Thomas Mitchell, a lawyer whose commercials I'd seen on late-night television. He specialized in taking on cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch, and he had a reputation for going after powerful defendants. We met the next morning at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, away from downtown where hospital staff might see us. Mitchell was a thin man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that seemed out of place among the college students and artists who frequented the cafe. "Show me what you have," he said without preamble. I laid out everything: the photographs, the billing records, the documentation of unnecessary procedures, and finally, the recording of Dr. Webb's admission. Mitchell listened to the audio 3 times, his expression growing more intense with each replay. "This is explosive," he said finally, "but you understand what you're getting into. They're going to come after you with everything they have. They'll try to destroy your credibility, your career, maybe even your personal life." I thought about Mrs. Martinez, about Mr. Chun, about all the families who'd been victimized while I stayed silent. What choice do I have? Mitchell smiled for the first time since we'd met. "That's what I wanted to hear. Let's take these bastards down." The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later, naming Dr. Webb, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and the hospital's parent corporation as defendants. The allegations included medical fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and wrongful death. Within hours of the filing, the story was picked up by every major news outlet in Chicago. But Dr. Webb's counterattack was swift and vicious. Within days, stories began appearing in medical journals, questioning my competence as a nurse. Anonymous sources claimed I had a history of making false accusations against doctors. Someone leaked details of my student loan debt and suggested I was motivated by money rather than justice. The harassment escalated quickly. My car tires were slashed. I received threatening phone calls at all hours. Someone broke into my apartment while I was at the grocery store. Though nothing was stolen, it was clearly meant as intimidation. I had to move in with my sister Maria in Phoenix temporarily, conducting depositions and meetings via video conference. The turning point came during pretrial discovery, when our investigation revealed the scope of Dr. Webb's operation. It wasn't just him. It was a network of doctors, administrators, and billing specialists who had been systematically defrauding insurance companies and patients for over 5 years. The total amount of fraudulent billing exceeded $3.2 million. But Dr. Webb's lawyers were skilled, and they knew how to work the system. During my deposition, they spent 6 hours trying to discredit me, questioning everything from my education to my motives to my mental health. They suggested I was a disgruntled employee who had fabricated evidence to get revenge on a doctor who had rightfully fired me. "Isn't it true, Miss Santos, that you were terminated for violating patient confidentiality?" Dr. Webb's lead attorney asked during one particularly brutal session. "I was terminated for trying to prevent an unnecessary surgery that could have killed a patient," I replied, my voice steady despite the intimidation tactics. "But you have no medical degree, correct? You're not qualified to make decisions about what procedures are or aren't necessary." "I'm qualified to read test results and recognize when they don't match the diagnosis being used to justify expensive procedures." The attorney smiled coldly. "So you admit you were making medical judgments outside your scope of practice?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for. "I admit I was trying to prevent patient harm, which is part of every nurse's scope of practice. And I have Dr. Webb's own words admitting that he scheduled the procedure regardless of test results because the patient had good insurance." The attorney's confident expression faltered as Thomas Mitchell played the recording for everyone in the room. Dr. Webb's voice filled the conference room, clearly stating that he didn't care what the tests showed and that the surgery would proceed because of the patient's insurance coverage. The room fell completely silent except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic outside the law firm's downtown offices. Dr. Webb's face had gone completely white, and I could see the exact moment when he realized his carefully constructed defense had just collapsed. "Where did you get this recording?" his attorney demanded. "From a phone call Dr. Webb made to what he thought was the billing department," Mitchell replied smoothly. "A call in which he explicitly admitted to scheduling medically unnecessary procedures for financial gain. Within a week, settlement negotiations had begun. But Dr. Webb made one final, desperate move to discredit me. He and his legal team filed a motion claiming that my testimony should be inadmissible because I was a disgruntled employee with a history of making false accusations. The motion hearing was scheduled for a gray December morning in Cook County Circuit Court. I sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing my best suit and trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Dr. Webb sat across the courtroom with his team of expensive lawyers, still radiating the arrogance that had gotten him into this situation. His attorney stood before Judge Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for cutting through legal maneuvering to get to the truth. Your Honor, the plaintiff's primary witness is a terminated employee who violated hospital policies and has a clear financial motive to fabricate evidence against my client. Her testimony is unreliable and should be excluded from any proceedings. I felt like I was reliving that moment in the break room when Dr. Webb had called me irrelevant. Here I was again, being dismissed and discredited by people who thought their power made them untouchable. Then Thomas Mitchell stood up, and I saw why he had the reputation he did. Your Honor, opposing counsel is attempting to silence the one person brave enough to expose a massive fraud scheme that victimized dozens of patients and their families. This witness didn't fabricate anything. She documented crimes being committed in plain sight, and she has audio evidence of the defendant admitting to those crimes. He played the recording again, Dr. Webb's voice filling the courtroom with his damning admission. When it finished, Judge Williams looked directly at Dr. Webb's attorney. Counselor, are you arguing that this recording is fabricated? No, Your Honor, but we contend that it was obtained through. Through what? A phone call your client willingly participated in? The judge's voice carried a warning tone. I've heard enough. She turned to face the courtroom, her expression stern and authoritative. The witness's testimony is admissible. This court will not exclude evidence of alleged criminal activity simply because it was provided by someone the defendants found inconvenient. Those words hit me like lightning. Her testimony is admissible. After months of being called irrelevant, unreliable, and untrustworthy, a judge had just ruled that my voice mattered, that my evidence mattered, that the truth I'd risked everything to expose would be heard. Dr. Webb's face crumpled as he realized his last defense had failed. Within 48 hours, his lawyers contacted us about a settlement that would compensate every victimized patient and their families, while also requiring Dr. Webb to surrender his medical license permanently. But more importantly, the case had exposed a system of corruption that led to criminal charges against 5 other doctors and administrators. Insurance companies began auditing all of Northwestern Memorial's billing, leading to millions in restitution payments. And new protocols were put in place to protect healthcare workers who report suspicious activities. Standing outside the courthouse on that cold December day, watching Dr. Webb walk away in handcuffs after pleading guilty to insurance fraud and racketeering, I realized that being called irrelevant had been the catalyst for everything that followed. If he had taken my concerns seriously from the beginning, if he had treated me with respect instead of contempt, none of this would have happened. But his arrogance and cruelty had transformed a quiet nurse into someone willing to risk everything for justice. And in the end, my testimony, the testimony he tried so hard to suppress, became the key that unlocked justice for dozens of families and exposed a corruption scheme that had operated in plain sight for years. The settlement money allowed me to finish my master's degree in nursing and start a consulting business helping other healthcare workers report fraud and abuse. I never returned to bedside nursing, but I found a different way to save lives by ensuring that people like Dr. Webb could never again use their power to harm the vulnerable. Sometimes the most irrelevant people turn out to be the most dangerous enemies of corruption. And sometimes justice comes not from the powerful, but from those brave enough to speak truth to power, even when everything is stacked against them. What do you think about corruption in healthcare? Have you ever witnessed something that made you question the system? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, true stories that expose the dark side of institutions we trust.